Dusk of Reckoning. Chapter 1. Shadows of Accountability. As dawn broke, light seeped into the hollow grounds, casting an ethereal glow over the ancient graves that bordered the clearing. The air crackled with anticipation, thick with the tension of the gathered crowd. Shadows danced against the crumbling stone walls, remnants of a once thriving community. At the center of this charged atmosphere stood Elysia Zaroth, radiating authority and fear. Her voice sliced through the murmurs like a knife, commanding attention. Beneath her, a protester, a mere silhouette, was subdued by a throng of bodies, their faces twisted in rage. The moment felt heavy, as if the very ground held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash to unfold. Lysander edged closer, battling the ghosts of past failures with each hesitant step. The protester's eyes darted around, pleading yet resolute, igniting a fire within her. Elysia's chilling laughter erupted, shattering the tension that hung in the air. "Step back, Lysander. This isn't your fight," she warned her followers, shifting like wolves, ready to strike for a heartbeat. Lysander hesitated, trapped by the memory of the cage that had once symbolized justice and her fear of risking it all again. The crowd surged forward, fueled by anger and adrenaline. Lysander stumbled back, her breath quickening as chaos erupted in every direction. A cry cut through the noise, the protester's desperate plea ringing in her ears. Elysia stepped forward, a fierce hunter among trembling victims. "Anyone who dares to challenge me will feel the consequences." Her threat crackled in the air, and Lysander's resolve wavered. Was her intervention worth the bloodshed? The thought gnawed at her, twisting her stomach in knots. Retreating into the shadows cast by the ancient stones, Lysander felt the protester's plea echo within her. She glanced back, the scene sharpening into focus like a haunting vision. Elysia stood victorious, wielding her control like a weapon, while the protester's cries lingered in the hollow of her chest. Was this the price of justice? The dawn light, once promising, now shrouded the hollow grounds in oppressive silence. A haunting question lingered. How many more would suffer before she found the courage to fight back? Dusk settled over the Judgment Gorge, casting a dim veil of light that elongated shadows around a gathering crowd. Tension hung thick in the air, punctured by the desperate cries of a trapped protester. Lysander Praxus stood at the edge, her heart racing with urgency. If she failed to act before the week ended, the consequences would be irreversible, an unpayable debt to a corrupt system that devoured lives. Each moment felt stolen, ticking away like sand in an hourglass. She had to save them. She had to save the protester. There was no time to waste. Lysander's feet felt glued to the ground as dread mixed with adrenaline. The mob roared, faces warped with rage, and the protester's desperate pleas echoed in her ears. Help! Each cry pierced her heart, igniting a flicker of resolve even as doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if she failed again? What if this repeated the past, where her attempts to dismantle the oppressive system only led to more pain? The urgency pressed down on her. With every second, the protester's fate slipped further from reach, buried beneath the mob's fury. Each breath felt shallow, and Lysander fought the urge to flee. Instead, she stepped forward, hands trembling as she weighed the risks. The crowd pressed in, a mass of fury and threats, their eyes boring into her, daring her to intervene. "Get out of here," someone shouted, venom lacing their voice, but she couldn't back down. Not this time. Only 3 hours remain, and the weight of every second threatens to crush me. The deadline loomed, and if she didn't act, justice would remain a distant dream, leaving her with an unpayable debt. 3 hours until it's all over. She muttered under her breath, urgency prickling her skin. The protesters' cries grew louder, more frantic, as the mob closed in. Each second felt like an eternity, and the decision loomed heavy upon her shoulders. Risk her own safety or watch hope flicker out? The memory of friends lost to injustice stung like salt in an open wound. Clenching her fists, determination solidified her resolve. No more waiting, no more hesitation. Lysander lunged forward, heart pounding against her ribs, instinct screaming at her to turn back. As she reached the edge of the mob, a hand shot out, grabbing her wrist like a vice. The crowd turned, eyes narrowing, and her moment of bravery became clear. The protesters stumbled back, fear etched on their face, and the mob roared in unison, ready to unleash their wrath. Chaos erupted around her. Had she just stepped into a trap with no escape? Justice or ruin flashed through her mind as the world blurred into turmoil. Dusk settled over the hollow grounds, casting long shadows that twisted like the intentions of the mob gathering at the sunken plaza. The air was tense, charged with a palpable energy radiating from the crowd. Lysander Praxus stood at the edge of the chaos, pulse quickening as the distant screams of a protester echoed from within. Time slipped through her fingers, an unrelenting current of urgency. If she didn't act now, the consequences could seal not just the protester's fate but her own as well. Justice was at stake, and she had only 4 days left until the political prisoner faced a reckoning that could shatter lives. She wouldn't let that happen, not on her watch. Determined, Lysander surged forward, each step fueled by resolve as the mob pushed forward, a relentless tide. At the forefront stood Elysia Zaroth, a smirk twisting her lips, surrounded by followers who formed a barrier of thorns. "You truly think you can infiltrate my domain without consequence? Your foolishness is astonishing. Justice demands its due, and you shall not evade it," Elysia taunted, her voice slicing through the charged air. But Lysander's resolve hardened. Fear would not dictate her actions. The protester's terrified eyes locked onto hers, a silent plea for salvation igniting a fire within her. "We must escape this wretched place, for if we linger, the shadows will claim us," she shouted, pushing through the throng, the mob's anger palpable, a living entity eager to consume her. As she neared, Elysia unleashed her followers. They surged forward, grabbing at Lysander with fierce hands, pulling her back into the fray. Each grasp felt like a vice, her breath quickening as she fought against them. "Get off me," she gasped, wrenching away from one grip as another clamped onto her arm. Desperation clawed at her throat. Time was slipping away, the protester's face twisted with fear, and uncertainty gnawed at her resolve. What if she couldn't reach them in time? What if the mob descended before she made it? With a final push, she broke free, lunging toward the protester now cornered against a wall of bodies. Panic flooded her senses, a glimmer of hope quickly overshadowed by the mob's encroaching rage. Elysia's followers had distracted the crowd momentarily, but they wouldn't hold them back for long. The air thickened with hostility, and Lysander gasped for breath, her chest tightening with urgency. "I need to get you out of here," she yelled, her voice barely rising above the cacophony. But the crowd surged, an angry beast ready to strike. 3 hours until the execution. 3 hours until everything fell apart. Just as she reached the protester's side, a roar erupted from the mob, and Elysia's voice pierced the chaos. "Seize her!" The air crackled with tension as Lysander stood at the edge of the hollow grounds, shadows draping over the gathering crowd beneath the dimming sky. Dusk cast a heavy ambiance, the faces twisted with anger and desperation. She gripped the protester's hand, her pulse quickening, matching the chaotic rhythm of the shouts. Elysia hovered at the periphery, her sharp, unyielding gaze scanning the scene. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet the past weighed heavily on her. Time was running out, and failure loomed like a spectre, threatening to claim another life. Lysander lunged forward, weaving through the bodies that surged like a tide. Each shout and curse ignited her resolve. She spotted the protester, a young man with fear etched across his features, pinned against the cold stone of a grave, the anger of the mob a fiery backdrop. "This way!" she shouted, urgency slicing through her voice, drowning out the chaos around her. But hesitation flickered in his eyes, and for a moment doubt flickered in her mind, casting a shadow over her resolve. Would he trust her? Elysia shifted, her head tilting slightly as she narrowed her eyes. Lysander's stomach twisted. No room for mistakes. With a swift motion, she grabbed the protester's arm, pulling him close, shielding him from the mob's fury. Their bodies collided, warmth mixing with the chill of impending doom. But the moment was fleeting. Rage erupted nearby, and a fist swung in their direction, barely missing Lysander's shoulder. She ducked, instincts honed by years of survival kicking in. "Run!" she urged, her voice raw as they bolted. The mob surged, a wave of fury and chaos, a living entity intent on destruction. Lysander glanced back, her heart drumming in her chest. Elysia was there, closer now, her expression unreadable, but the intensity of her gaze threatened to unravel Lysander's carefully constructed facade. Her throat tightened, choking off her breath. No, not now. Not when they were so close to escape. Memories of failure and loss flooded her senses, but she pushed them aside.
She had to keep moving, had to protect this life even if it meant risking her own. "This way!" Lysander cried again, urgency propelling them forward. The ground beneath their feet shifted. The mob's energy crackled like electricity. Just as they neared the edge of the crowd, a shout pierced the air, sharp and accusatory. There, a figure pointed, eyes wide in recognition. Lysander's breath hitched. No time to think. She yanked the protester closer, praying Elysia's gaze wouldn't follow. The mob roared, and the
dusk draped itself over the judgment, gorge like a shroud, shadows stretching as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. The distant roar of the mob quickened Lysander Praxus's pulse as she stood at the precipice, a chilling reminder of the urgency pressing against her chest. If I don't act soon, justice will slip through my fingers, and I'll be ensnared in guilt, a burning moth drawn to the flame of my own inaction. 3 days. 3 days to save a life and reclaim her purpose before the consequences became permanent. Action was imperative. Time was slipping away. The crowd surged like a stormy tide, faces twisted with rage as they closed in on the protester. Each shout hammered at Lysander's resolve, driving nails into her determination. She could see him clawing at the ground, eyes wide with terror. To step into that chaos meant exposing herself to their wrath. Her muscles tensed, a primal fight-or-flight instinct surging within her. What would happen if she didn't intervene? The thought clawed at her insides. Elysia's voice rang in her mind, cold and demanding, a reminder of her failures that insisted on accountability, a relentless judge in her conscience. The distance between action and inaction narrowed painfully, and the weight of time pressed down like a physical force. "We don't have time for this!" The words screamed in her mind as she hesitated, watching the mob's fervor build a roaring bonfire ready to consume everything in its path. Madness filled the air. The protesters' screams reverberated, chilling her, each note a bitter reminder of her fear. Her throat tightened as fear flooded her senses. Every second felt like a countdown, dread pulsing in her veins. Elysia's face swam in her memory, twisting the knife deeper. Would she even recognize a savior if one stood before her? No time for doubt, yet thoughts spiraled, roots binding her to the ground as the mob closed in. A sudden roar erupted from the crowd, a collective surge that pushed the protester to the brink of the gorge. Panic clawed at Lysander's chest, and she stumbled back, breath hitching. If she didn't act now, darkness would consume him. 3 hours remained until the deadline loomed like an executioner, and with each passing second, the weight of her indecision grew heavier. Sweat trickled down her palms, the pulse in her temples pounding like a war drum. This was it. Either she stepped forward, or watched another life slip into the abyss, all while her own debts loomed larger than the shadows around her. The mob's fervor was palpable, a living. Chapter 2. Shadows of Accountability. The dusk deepened, cloaking the judgment gorge in shades of violet and grey. Shadows flickered among the crowd, their faces a blur of anger and desperation. Elysia stood at the forefront, defiance etched into her features like a stone carving. Memories of betrayal surged within Lysander, echoes of Elysia's past taunt stitching together a tapestry of doubt. The air crackled, thick with the scent of sweat and fear, heavy and unyielding. If she faltered now, justice would slip through her fingers and the cost would be fatal. The oppressive atmosphere pressed down, filled with the weight of looming confrontation. Lysander strode forward. Each step felt like a battle against the dread coiling in her gut. "Elysia, can you not feel the cries of the oppressed clawing at your conscience?" she shouted, her voice a desperate call that barely masked the tremor beneath. Elysia turned, a smirk curling her lips, eyes glinting with knowledge. "What compels you to approach me, Lysander? Surely you haven't come to beg for mercy from the executioner's grasp." The crowd stirred, whispers sparking and spreading, an inferno of anticipation building around them. Lysander clenched her fists, grounding herself as anger surged through her veins, the walls of the gorge seeming to close in, suffocating her resolve. "You know who the protester is, don't you?" The question hung heavy between them, a stone cast into murky waters, rippling with the weight of unspoken truths. Elysia stepped closer, her voice a low hiss. "Knowledge is a dangerous thing, wouldn't you agree? You've wielded it poorly in the past, Lysander. I wonder, how many lives have you sacrificed in your pursuit of justice?"
Each word dripped with venom, the crowd's murmurs swelling around them, amplifying Lysander's shame. The memories clawed at her, faces of those who had suffered because of her decisions. She fought to keep her expression neutral, but her chest tightened. "I did what I had to do," she shot back, desperation lacing her tone. Yet her mind echoed with the faces of the fallen, haunting reminders of justice's failures. Elysia's laughter rang out, sharp and mocking, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You think you can confront me? You were always too soft, too naive. The cage offers a false sense of accountability, one that you failed to grasp when it mattered most." The crowd surged, energy crackling in the air, alive with anticipation. Lysander's breath came in ragged gasps, panic clawing at her throat. "You're manipulating them," Lysander shouted, her voice rising above the din. "You're feeding their fears." Elysia leaned in, her breath warm and conspiratorial. "And you're just feeding off your guilt. It's delicious, really." The barb struck deep, igniting a fire within Lysander. She took a step back, fury and resolve intertwining it.
Dawn crept over the hollow grounds, a fragile light barely illuminating the graves standing sentinel in the dew-soaked earth. The air was thick with anticipation as Lysander took a deep breath, the weight of what lay ahead pressing on her. Shadows from her past clung to her, challenging her resolve. Elysia's taunting words echoed in her mind, urging her to confront not only the truth about the protester, but also the essence of her own failures. As the crowd began to stir, a restless energy thrummed through the air, and Lysander stepped forward, the frantic thrum echoing in her ears. Time was slipping away, accountability loomed like a spectre, and urgency coated her tongue. Elysia stood at the edge of the gathering, her silhouette sharp against the dawn, a knowing smile curling her lips. "Do you believe you can uncover the truth?" she taunted, her voice dripping with mockery. Lysander clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, fighting the urge to lunge at the woman who had so expertly woven guilt into her thoughts. Elysia stepped closer, eyes glinting like shards of glass. "What did you do back then, Lysander? Did you stand by while they silenced the innocent?" Each word struck like arrows, embedding deeper as Elysia continued. "You share their guilt." Lysander stepped back, her throat tightening. Memories flooded her mind, faces, voices, the screams that had haunted her. She had wanted to protect them, to shield the vulnerable from the claws of power, but had she acted in time? Doubt coiled around her heart, tightening its grip. Elysia reveled in her reaction, a predator savoring the fear. "You're lost, Lysander, just a fleeting shadow among the graves," she whispered, her tone a venomous caress. Every syllable dripped with the promise of her own failures, forcing Lysander to confront the haunting spectres of her past. "Enough," Lysander shouted, her voice slicing through the tension. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. "What dark truths do you conceal about the protester, Elysia? Unveil them, if you have the courage." Elysia merely laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the hollow grounds. "Mark this, Lysander, the truth is a gilded cage, artfully fashioned by your own failings." Lysander's heart raced, fury and desperation colliding. The truth danced just out of reach, an elusive flame flickering in the early light. Elysia's words twisted it, shaping her doubts into a barbed weapon. With each passing moment, the weight of the crowd bore down on Lysander, their restless murmurs a constant reminder of the stakes. She had to act, to uncover the plot before it swallowed her whole. But Elysia stood there, insufferably calm, a wall of deceit. "You seek answers." The hollow grounds lay shrouded in a deepening twilight, the air thick with anticipation and the spectre of past failures. Lysander stood at the edge, dread coiling tighter with every heartbeat. Graves, silent witnesses to burdens of justice long abandoned, loomed in the background. The murmurs of the crowd surged like a tide, each voice a reminder of the weight of their anticipation heavy on her shoulders. Seeking clarity, she found only the suffocating reminder of the lives extinguished by the very system she sought to amend. Could she face the tempest that Elysia conjured, a storm of chaos ready to consume everything she held dear? Or would she retreat into the shadows, shackled by guilt? Lysander's gaze darted through the throng, searching for a glimmer of hope among anxious faces. A group of men leaned against a weathered stone, their voices low yet urgent. "Tomorrow at dawn," they say. "The execution. No one escapes the cage. Not now," one murmured, his jaw clenched. The words struck her like a blade, slicing through her resolve. Urgency gripped her throat,
each second counting. She stood frozen, torn between the voices in her head. She had stood by once before, paralyzed by indecision, and watched as justice slipped through her fingers. Not again, not this time. A flash of movement, a wilted flower clutched in the hands of an old woman, her sorrowful face a map of loss. Lysander stepped closer, drawn to the fragility of the gesture. The woman's hands trembled, offering a tribute to the lost. The crowd's murmurs crescendoed, filled with anger and despair. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms. No more hesitation. She couldn't allow fear to paralyze her any longer. She had to choose. Every breath felt like a countdown. The sunset blazed in a riot of crimson and gold, yet all she could see were the faces of the condemned, those she had vowed to protect, looming large in her mind. What would they say if they could see her now? A coward, too afraid to confront the darkness. As the crowd surged, a flicker of defiance ignited within her. She would not be the architect of her own ruin. With the crowd pressing in around her, Lysander took a deep breath, the scent of earth and impending rain mingling in the air. Her heart raced, each beat urging her toward action. She scanned the horizon, the last light of day fading fast. The shadows loomed, echoing the doubts that knotted in her gut. But as the first stars pierced the twilight, a single thought crystallized in her mind. This time she would fight. For them, for justice. But would it be enough?
The hollow grounds lay enveloped in the deepening gloom of dusk, shadows stretching across the uneven floor like grasping fingers. The remnants of ancient stone walls, adorned with weathered carvings, surrounded the plaza, their silent tales echoing the community's past grievances. Lysander Praxus stood at the center, the weight of urgency pressing down on her. Elysia Zaroth needed to confess the truth about the execution plot before the week ended, before the fate of the political prisoner sealed in a cage became irreversible. The crowd's agitation buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, their shouts rising in a chaotic crescendo. Lysander's heart raced, each beat a reminder that time slipped through her fingers like sand. She had to confront Elysia now or risk losing everything she fought for. Lysander pushed through the throng, her pulse racing with each step. Desperation painted every face around her, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Elysia!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. The crowd turned, eyes narrowing at her, hostility simmering dangerously. Elysia stood at the edge, her expression unreadable, something flickering in her gaze. Defiance or fear, Lysander couldn't tell. "What is it that you seek, Lysander? Surely you know the weight of your questions," she replied, her calm demeanor only igniting the crowd further. Lysander took a step closer, urgency choking her, each word struggling to escape. "I demand answers. You hold the key to our salvation, and if we linger in this twilight, the light of hope will be extinguished." Elysia's gaze darted around her, and in that moment a choice twisted in Lysander's gut. "You don't understand. The truth could unravel everything." Panic surged through Lysander, the crowd's restlessness pressing down on her like a heavy shroud. A riot loomed on the horizon, and with every breath, the stakes escalated. "We don't have time for this." She pressed, her voice barely audible over the collective roar. Before dawn it could all be lost. Elysia shuddered, the truth spilling from her lips as if forced. "The prisoner isn't who you think it's." But before she could finish, a deafening crash echoed through the hollow grounds. A stone flew through the air, shattering against the wall nearby, igniting a wildfire of panic. "They're turning on each other!" someone shouted. Elysia's eyes darted around her, fear flashing across her face as chaos erupted. Lysander felt her resolve tested. Protect Elysia and risk losing the truth, or expose the conspiracy and potentially unleash the mob's wrath. The clock ticked mercilessly, each second echoing in her mind. 3 more days. 3 more days until the prisoner's fate was sealed. As the crowd erupted, Dusk enveloped the hollow grounds in deep blues and greys, shadows weaving between crumbling stone walls like secrets waiting to be unearthed. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, each breath a reminder of the past's vibrant echoes, haunting yet alive. Lysander surveyed the uneven floor, where gravestones jutted out like forgotten memories. The rustling banners overhead stirred the anticipation coiled in her stomach, while muffled voices rose and fell, an urgent chorus of grievances wrapping around her. The platform at the center loomed,
A stage set for confrontation, its rough surface echoing the stories of those who had stood before her, waiting for change. The crowd surged, a pulsating mass as Lysander stood among the grave markers, their somber presence a reminder of lives lost to injustice. The metallic tang of tension hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. Elysia's voice sliced through the crowd with authority, igniting a flicker of hope entwined with guilt within her, a reminder of the power of conviction. The gentle brush of grass beneath her worn boots contrasted with the rough stone at her back, a tactile reminder of the precarious balance she was on, poised between action and inaction. Memories of past failures clawed at her throat, choking her resolve. A shout pierced the atmosphere, sharp and disconcerting, cutting through the crowd's collective breath, demanding attention and action. Lysander's gaze snapped toward the commotion near the platform, where a figure struggled against a group of protesters. The air thickened with the scent of sweat and agitation, a stark reminder that the moment demanded fervor. She swallowed hard, the taste of fear mingling with the dampness around her, as her mind raced with the weight of her choices. The gravestones surrounding her seemed to lean in, urging her to remember those who had fought before, those who had lost everything. Could she be the one to change the tide as the scene unfolded? Lysander's thoughts spiraled with the gravity of her decision. Every heartbeat echoed with memories of justice slipping through her fingers like sand, and the burden of what could come if she faltered again. Elysia's voice rang in her ears, a haunting melody that urged her to remember the faces behind the cause. Yet the shadows around her deepened, a reminder of the consequences that lay ahead. Just then, the crowd's murmur shifted, charged with a new energy, pulling her focus back to the present. The dusk deepened, and uncertainty loomed like a storm, manifesting the choices ahead. The hollow grounds pulsed with life, yet the gravestones whispered tales of despair, reminding her of the burdens carried by those who came before.
Chapter 3. Shadows of Judgment. Dawn crept over the jagged cliffs of the Judgment Gorge, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of the gathered crowd. Lysander Praxus stood among them, her chest pounding hard against her ribs, breath shallow and quick. Fear hung in the air, a palpable tension clinging to her skin. Today she had one goal, to uncover Elysia Zaroth's plans and find a way to save the political prisoner whose life hung by a thread. The seconds slipped away like sand through her fingers. If she failed to act before the week ended, the execution would leave a permanent scar on her conscience. Every moment felt like a countdown to doom, and the stakes had never been higher. The crowd murmured, anxious faces shifting and twitching, whispers slicing through her resolve. Lysander's eyes darted through the throng, searching for anyone willing to speak freely, but fear of Elysia's wrath held them in a vice grip. She leaned closer to a pair of women, their eyes wide, but as she opened her mouth to ask, a guard's booming voice sliced through the air. "Back in line, you filth, no dissent." The women flinched, drawing away as if burned. Panic clawed at her throat. She had to blend in, to remain invisible, yet every heartbeat felt like a countdown to disaster. 3 hours until the execution, no time to waste. With a deep breath, she forced herself to appear calm, scanning for the next opportunity. A man stepped back, his face pale, muttering about Elysia's plans, something about purging dissenters before the day was done. The words ignited a flicker of hope in her gut, but the guard's watchful gaze swept over them, and she froze. She could feel his eyes bore into her, her pulse quickening. No time to act, no time to think. Just as the man opened his mouth again, Lysander took a step back, a cold sweat forming on her brow. If she was discovered, all would be lost. The guard turned away, and a shuddering gasp escaped her lips. She couldn't lose this chance. Just a few more moments. She moved closer to the edge of the crowd, her senses heightened, adrenaline flooding her veins. The crowd pressed against her, but she spotted a familiar face, a former ally who had once shared whispers of resistance. She reached out, desperate to reconnect, but the moment was interrupted by a loud clank of armor as another guard pushed through. The crowd parted like water, and Lysander's heart plummeted. She hesitated, torn between the chance for information and the very real threat of capture. If she made a noise or stumbled, it would all be over. The execution was nearing. She could feel the tension thickening in the air. Every second counted, but every second also risked her life. She needed to act, but how? The hollow grounds buzzed with restless energy. a cacophony of anxious whispers mingling with the distant tolling of the execution bell. Lysander Praxus pressed her back against the crumbling stone wall, her pulse racing, pounding in her ears. Moments dwindled like sand through her fingers. If she failed to gather crucial information about Elysia's plans before the week's end, the political prisoner faced a grim fate, a debt of blood and suffering that would forever haunt her conscience. She had to navigate through the crowd, to listen, to learn, to formulate a plan. Every second felt like a lifetime as the stakes grew higher, and a deafening urgency clawed at her throat. Lysander edged closer to the thrumming heart of the gathering, the voices swirling around her like a tempest. "They say Elysia's got a new weapon, something that could turn the tide." A woman whispered, her eyes darting nervously. A surge of adrenaline shot through Lysander as she leaned in, desperate to hear more. The guard's presence loomed over her like a shadow, tension prickling at the back of her neck as she inched forward, each word a lifeline. Sweat trickled down her spine. Time was running out, and she had mere hours to act. The crowd surged, pushing her closer to the center, but each step forward felt fraught with danger. If caught, her mission would end in failure, and the prisoner would pay the ultimate price. Just as she leaned in, straining to catch a glimpse of the speaker, a sudden shout pierced the air. "You there!" A guard's voice thundered, sharp and accusatory. Panic gripped her chest, squeezing her breath as she turned to meet the guard's piercing gaze. There was no time to think, only to react. She stumbled back, blending into the shadows, the urgency to save the prisoner clashing with the instinct to flee. She had come too far to be caught now, but the knowledge of Elysia's control tightened its grip around her throat, suffocating her resolve. Lysander ducked behind a weathered pillar, the cool stone against her skin a stark contrast to the heat of her fear. Each breath felt heavier, laden with the weight of her decision. If she didn't piece together Elysia's plans, the prisoner's fate might already be sealed. 3 hours until the execution, a thought that sent a shiver down her spine. How had it come to this? The clock was a relentless countdown, and she teetered on the edge of chaos, caught between action and despair. As she crouched in the shadows, a new wave of panic surged through her. The crowd was dispersing, and with it her chance to glean any further information. Lysander's breath quickened. She had to act now, or risk losing everything. A figure emerged from the throng, cloaked and hooded, their presence a potential ally, or a new threat. With the execution looming, she couldn't afford to hesitate. Lysander stepped out of the Dusk settled over the hollow grounds, the fading light casting long shadows that whispered of the day's horrors. Lysander Praxus crouched beneath the gnarled branches of an ancient tree. Her pulse raced as she replayed the brutal execution in her mind. 3 days left, 3 days until the deadline loomed over her, pressing against her chest like a weight she could hardly bear. She had to deliver justice, not just for the fallen, but for every soul crushed under Elysia's iron fist. But the images haunted her, fear tightened its grip, a chill settling in her chest. What if rising against Elysia meant losing everything? The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and dying leaves as Lysander fought against the rising panic. A decision weighed heavily upon her: confront Elysia now or risk everything, and everyone she loved, by doing nothing. Time slipped away. If she didn't act before the week ended, justice would slip through her fingers like sand. But the thought of Elysia's retaliation made her hesitate, her breath shallow. She had seen the danger that woman posed. Dissent carried an enormous risk, and she could already feel the grip of fear tightening around her. Every rustle in the underbrush made her jump, her thoughts racing with the consequences of her inaction. How many more would die if she chose silence? The faces of the fallen flashed before her, their cries for justice echoing in her ears. But fear was a powerful enemy, holding her hostage in the shadows. What if she failed? What if Elysia retaliated? Lysander squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the images, but they returned with a vengeance, each one a reminder of her paralysis. The longer she hesitated, the closer the deadline drew. 3 days, 2 days, 1. What then? Then a figure stepped into the clearing, silhouetted against the dying light. Lysander's heart leaped into her throat, panic and relief battling for dominance. Had she been found? Or was this a chance for salvation? But as the figure drew closer, recognition hit her like a punch to the gut. This was no ally, it was Marcus, the very person whose life hung in the balance of her decisions. His eyes were wide with fear, mirroring her own. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered urgently. "Elysia's guards are everywhere. We need to move." Her mind raced, the urgency of their situation pressing down on her.
Could she trust him? Was it worth the risk to act together, or would it seal their fates? The shadows enveloped them, and Lysander's resolve began to crystallize. She could no longer afford to be paralyzed by fear. She had to take a stand. "Tonight we rise together, or we fall apart," she exclaimed, her voice steady with newfound purpose. This was no longer just her fight. The air crackled with tension, and as the night deepened,
the hollow grounds lay heavy in the afternoon light, shadows stretching like fingers over the graves. Lysander paused, her breath caught in her throat. The air hummed with tension, an electric charge coursing through her veins. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "We can't wait much longer." She clenched her fists, resolve hardening into steel. Elysia's figure loomed ahead, a spectre of cunning and intimidation. The crowd gathered, eyes flicking between her and the woman who had orchestrated so much suffering. Fear seeped into her determination, yet she couldn't falter now, not when justice hung in the balance. Lysander stepped forward, each footfall a challenge. Elysia stood with her arms crossed, a smirk dancing on her lips. "Ah, Lysander," she purred, the sweetness of her voice laced with barbs. "Have you come to plead for the dissenters? How noble of you! But you know how I handle such interruptions." The threat lingered in the air, palpable as the scent of damp earth. The echo of shackles clashing resounded in her mind. Memories of those who had vanished too soon weighing heavy upon her. "I demand the truth, Elysia. Your silence is a betrayal to those who suffer in shadows." The words tumbled out, defiance mingling with the tremor in her voice. Elysia stepped closer, invading Lysander's space, her gaze pinning her in place. A thin smile curled on her lips, a predator sizing up its prey. "Answers? Oh, dear Lysander, you misunderstand. Justice is merely a game, and I hold all the cards." The crowd shifted, murmurs rising like the wind, and Lysander's resolve flickered. What if she was right? What if their fight meant nothing? Elysia's laughter rang out, bright and mocking. "You think you can intimidate me? I have the power to make you disappear, to silence your little rebellion with a single command. Do you really believe you can win this?" She gestured casually, and the shadows behind her stirred. A cadre of guards emerged, their armor glinting ominously in the light. Lysander's pulse quickened, fear coiled tightly within her. She was outmatched, and the truth hit her like a cold wave. There was no room for retreat, yet no path forward seemed open. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Elysia's gaze darkened, and Lysander's bravado slipped. In that moment, Lysander glimpsed the truth beneath Elysia's facade. The woman was a master of manipulation, spinning webs of deceit with a flick of her wrist. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, Lysander. Those who challenge me vanish into the night, never to return. Do you want to join them?" Dusk descended over the hollow grounds, casting elongated shadows that danced across the uneven cobblestones. The air, thick with the earthy aroma of damp soil and wildflowers, bore a metallic tang clinging to Lysander's skin. As she stepped forward, her boots sank into patches of grass, the rough texture of stone walls brushing against her fingertips, grounding her amidst the chaos. Muffled voices ebbed and flowed like a distant tide, sharply contrasting with the chilling silence surrounding the gravestones, which stood like forgotten memories. Each heartbeat echoed her dread, a reminder of the brutality she had witnessed. The urgency of the moment pressed down on her. Heavy like the dusk settling in, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A group huddled near the central platform, their hushed tones stark against the rising tension in the air. Lysander edged closer, the grass whispering against her ankles, straining to catch snippets of their conversation. Words like rebellion and justice floated on the breeze, igniting a spark of hope within her. Yet fear tightened around her throat, a stark reminder of the stakes. The crumbling walls loomed like sentinels, their ancient carvings whispering tales of past conspiracies that now felt all too relevant. Lysander gripped her stomach, the hollow ache echoing the emptiness of the graves around her, each one a reminder of those silenced forever. What if she joined them? What if she failed her friends? Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air, sending a wave of energy rippling through the crowd. Lysander turned, her heart racing as she spotted a figure emerging from the shadows, their face obscured but their presence unmistakable.
The crowd shifted, tension crackling in the air as the figure raised a hand, silencing the murmurs demanding attention. Lysander's breath hitched. The metallic taste of fear filled her mouth, mingling with the pungent scent of sweat and desperation. The moment hung heavy, a fragile thread poised to snap, while the weight of her choices pressed down on her. In that charged silence, the air vibrated with potential, the whisper of wildflowers and damp earth swirling into a heady concoction that ignited her senses. As the figure's voice rose, filling the hollow grounds with fervent words, hope twined with dread in Lysander's chest. The whispers of dissent mingled with the chill of approaching night, a reminder that darkness was not merely an absence of light, but a canvas for change. She stood at the precipice of possibility, her heart pounding in time with the resolve swelling around her. This was not just a gathering among graves.
Chapter 4. Echoes of Accountability. Dawn crested over the Judgment Gorge, illuminating the jagged cliffs in vibrant hues of orange and gold. Yet for Lysander Praxus, time slipped away, each moment pressing heavily on her. She had 3 days to confront Elysia Zaroth about the political prisoner, 3 days to unravel the web of deceit threatening to engulf her friends. Each second spent hesitating felt like a dagger in her resolve. She couldn't allow Elysia to pull the strings any longer. The burden of the resistance, the truth, and the lives at stake weighed down on her as she stepped closer to the gorge's edge, ready to demand answers. Elysia perched at the brink, her silhouette framed against the dawn, exuding an air of command that twisted Lysander's stomach. "What is it that you desire, Lysander? Speak plainly, if you dare," she said, her voice smooth like silk, yet laced with thorns. Doubt flickered in Lysander's mind. Had she misjudged the very person she was trying to confront? "I know about the political prisoner, Elysia. I need the truth." The words burst from her, desperation fueling her tone. Elysia only smiled, a predator savoring the chase. "Truth, or the version you wish to hear?" Every heartbeat echoed in Lysander's ears, a reminder of the urgency pressing on her like the growing light of dawn. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stand firm. "You're hiding something. The resistance, it's real, isn't it?" Each question felt heavier than the last, an attempt to pierce the facade. Elysia's smile widened, amusement dancing in her eyes. "And what if it isn't? What if your belief in them leads you to ruin?" The way she twisted Lysander's words felt like a knife, and with each passing second, the reality of the situation sharpened. Time felt like an anchor, pulling her deeper into despair. Lysander's breath quickened, the weight of Elysia's words pressing down on her. "I refuse to be a pawn in your game, Elysia. Lives hang in the balance." Her voice trembled with an unexpected intensity. Elysia stepped closer, invading her space, her presence suffocating. "And what will you do about it? You have mere days before the council decides the prisoner's fate. You think they care about your resistance?" Her heart raced, caught between the urge to fight back and the instinct to flee. In that moment, Lysander's resolve ignited. She could not let this woman continue to play with lives. "You're wrong. I will uncover the truth," she shouted, her voice rising above the wind. Elysia raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on her lips, as if daring Lysander to challenge her further. But as Lysander's mind raced, the sound of time slipping away. At the edge of the Judgment Gorge, Lysander stood. The fractured stones beneath her boots mirrored her inner turmoil. Distant echoes of Elysia's laughter reverberated in her mind, a haunting melody mingling with the rush of the river below. Dawn light crept forward, illuminating the jagged cliffs and casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her. "The truth is far more dangerous than you know." Elysia's words crashed against her consciousness like an unrelenting tide. Could she lead without succumbing to the same darkness that had consumed her mentor? The air thickened with electricity, a stillness before the storm of decisions looming ahead. The river surged, relentless and wild, mirroring the fire igniting in her chest. A desire for vengeance surged alongside a glimmer of hope. She glanced at the water, its surface shimmering like 1,000 broken promises. A cage, a means of accountability weighed on her mind. Would the people rally behind her cause, or see her as yet another manipulator like Elysia? Doubt coiled in her stomach. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, steadying herself against the vertigo of uncertainty. The crowd below surged with faces,
each a potential ally or future enemy. She couldn't let fear dictate her choices, but the fear lingered, whispering doubts that slashed through her resolve. The sun rose higher, signaling the day's reckoning. Names of the oppressed swirled in her mind, each a reminder of her purpose. She would be a beacon, not a shadow, but vengeance painted a tempting picture, one where she could unleash fury on those who had wronged her, those who had caged her friends. The thought was intoxicating, yet it came with a bitter aftertaste. What would become of her once the dust settled? Would she find herself standing alone, a tyrant in the guise of a liberator? A cold shiver ran down her spine as she turned away from the river, seeking clarity among the gathering crowd. The voices rose, a murmur of anticipation and fear. They were looking to her, and their expectations pressed against her like a physical weight. She stepped forward, her heart racing, the rhythm syncing with the distant thrum of drums echoing through the gorge. Elysia's laughter still danced on the edges of her consciousness, taunting her hesitation. Would she confront the woman who had shaped her understanding of power, or forge her own path, free from manipulation? The tension in the air demanded action. She hesitated, each moment stretching painfully. With a shaky breath, she forced herself to face the throng below, their faces blurring into a sea of uncertainty. Each gaze was a question, an unspoken challenge. Could she unite them against a common enemy? Could she lead without losing herself to the dark?
The sun hung high over the hollow grounds, casting a golden hue on the gathering crowd that swelled beneath the gnarled trees. The air was thick with the scent of grilled gorge fish, sizzling from a nearby vendor, mingling with the earthy aroma of wild greens and root vegetables. Lysander Praxus stood on the edge of the assembly, her rough-spun tunic fluttering in the midday breeze, the weight of expectation pressing on her chest. The faces of the people emerged from the crowd, familiar yet distant, their hunger for change reflected in the bowls of grain porridge they shared among friends and families, each bite a reminder of the life they fought to reclaim. A hush fell, anticipation crackling like firelight in their eyes as she prepared to speak. Lysander stepped forward, her pulse racing as her eyes scanned the sea of faces. She raised her voice, steadying herself against the swell of emotion. Today we unite not just for ourselves, but for those who have suffered in silence, the prisoner who bears the dreams of our collective hearts. The crowd murmured, nodding, their fingers clutching bowls and cups, a communal bond forged in shared hardship. Nearby children played, their laughter a stark contrast to the gravity of her message, drawing glances from the elders who busied themselves with whispered prayers to the whispering spirits, seeking guidance amidst the tension. But just as the energy surged, Elysia emerged from the shadows, her presence slicing through the warmth like a winter chill. With a slight bow, hands clasped before her, she stepped forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "Ah, Lysander, so eager to parade as the martyr. Tell me, how is it you once mingled with the elite you now so fervently denounce? Did you not bask in their lavish banquets, indulging in their luxurious delights?" The crowd hesitated, the air thickened with doubt as a few exchanged wary looks. Memories of gilded halls felt like chains, binding Lysander to a past she wished to escape. Those feasts were not a choice, but a necessity. Lysander countered, her voice rising in defiance. "I sought knowledge, not power." But Elysia's words lingered like a bitter aftertaste, and the crowd shifted, unsure. Nearby a vendor served grilled fish, the smoky scent lingering, but it was lost on those who now struggled with the weight of Elysia's accusations. A man from the back, a grave digger known for his sharp tongue, spat out an oath, "God's willing, we will not be swayed by lies." Yet the murmurs of dissent grew, the past echoing, threatening to unravel the fragile bonds they had forged. As Lysander fought to reclaim the crowd's attention, she cast a fleeting glance at the graves scattered beyond the gathering, a reminder of the hollow grounds lay beneath the midday sun, a sunken plaza where shadows stretched across the uneven stone floor, dotted with gravestones that whispered their stories into the warm air. The scent of damp earth mingled with the sweetness of wildflowers, while an electric tension buzzed in the atmosphere. Muffled voices rose and fell like a restless tide, punctuated by the sharp rustle of banners fluttering against ancient stone walls. Lysander stepped onto the elevated platform, her pulse quickening with urgency. The rough texture of the stones pressed against her fingertips, anchoring her in the reality of the struggle ahead. Lysander's voice pierced the murmurs with clarity.
We gather today not merely for the fate of one, but to ignite the flame of hope that will light our path forward. The crowd shifted, determination flickering in their expressions, yet unease hung in the air, as if the spirits beneath their feet sensed the gravity of her call. She searched the crowd, her gaze darting over the anxious faces, feeling the warmth of the sun, while cool shadows brushed against her. Every heartbeat underscored the urgency of her message, a summons to rise against the corrupt regime that had stolen their very breath. But just as her momentum surged, a disruption sliced through the atmosphere. Elysia stepped forward, her presence stark against the crowd. "And might I inquire, Lysander, what of the shadows lurking in your past? What truths do you dare conceal from this gathering?" An electric silence enveloped the plaza, thickening the air. The murmurs morphed into a swell of doubt, threatening to drown out Lysander's resolve. Her hands trembled as she fought to keep her composure, the acrid taste of dust filling her mouth as loyalties shifted around her. As Elysia laid bare the secrets of Lysander's past, the crowd's energy shifted from unity to chaos. Shouts erupted, accusations flung like arrows at the heart of her intentions. Lysander tightened her grip on the platform, the rough stone digging into her palms, anchoring her as she sought to reclaim the narrative. "You all know the truth of our plight," she shouted, her voice trembling as she scanned the faces that had once held unwavering support. Sunlight flickered through the gaps in the stone wall, an erratic dance of light and shadow that mirrored her turmoil. Each breath hung heavy, weighed down by betrayal and the fear of losing everything she had fought for. The hollow grounds trembled with the weight of uncertain futures as Lysander's voice rose above the din, a rallying cry against the encroaching darkness within and without. The scent of wildflowers mingled with damp earth, a bittersweet reminder of what was at stake. With every heartbeat, the ground beneath her felt alive with the memories of
The hollow grounds vibrated with a tense energy, a stark reminder of the past and a beacon for the future. Lysander stood on the makeshift platform, her heart racing as she surveyed the crowd. Faces were illuminated by the flickering bonfire nearby, a mix of eagerness and apprehension reflected in their eyes. The gravestones surrounding them whispered tales of sacrifice, grounding the moment in history. The scent of wildflowers mingled with the morning mist, heightening her resolve. Today was a reckoning, a moment where unity could either prevail or crumble under the weight of despair. As the murmurs of the crowd swelled, she prepared to rally them against the encroaching darkness, acutely aware of the shadows lurking just beyond their sight. Lysander's voice rose above the crowd, strong and unwavering. "We stand on the edge of a great change where courage calls us to unite as one voice." Her words echoed against the gravestones, weaving connections with those who listened. The crowd leaned in, anticipation palpable. But just as hope surged, Elysia stepped from the shadows, her eyes sharp with challenge. "And what of your own past, Lysander?" The crowd recoiled, whispers of doubt weaving through the air, the moment heavy with uncertainty. Elysia's voice cut through the tension, laden with accusation. "You audaciously claim justice while abandoning your own. Have you truly silenced the cries of those you betrayed?" Each word dripped with venom, igniting doubt among the ranks. Lysander felt the familiar sting of betrayal, a reminder of choices that haunted her. The weight of her past threatened to pull her into despair, but she refused to let it define her. "You think you can rise above it, that you can lead us?" Elysia pressed, her tone relentless. The energy in the crowd shifted, a murmur rising that sent chills through Lysander. Would they turn against her? Yet she fought against fear. "I made mistakes, but I stand here not as a savior, but as one of you." Vulnerability filled her voice. "I know the darkness, I've walked through it, but together we can shine a light that will." Elysia interrupted, her tone scathing. "Or we can drown in it, led by a traitor." The crowd shifted again, uncertainty spreading like wildfire. Lysander's pulse quickened, urgency thrumming through her veins. The crowd's unity hung by a thread, their trust fraying with every accusation. Drawing closer to Elysia, she locked eyes with her, determination surging within. "You seek truth? Then let us face it together." The challenge lingered in the air, a gauntlet thrown. Would they join? Chapter 5. Shadows of Justice. As dusk enveloped the hollow grounds, the fading light stretched shadows across the sunken plaza, where the air pulsed with tension and grief. A crowd gathered, their faces etched with uncertainty, their collective sorrow palpable. Lysander gasped, her chest tightening with quick, uneven breaths as she stepped into the haunting space where gravestones punctuated the uneven floor, remnants of a history echoing with betrayal. Elysia stood at the center, her voice a clarion call, demanding attention and respect as she challenged their hesitations. Would they rise against their fear or succumb to it? Despair suffocated Lysander inescapable. Yet beneath it all, a flicker of resolve ignited within her. She clenched her fists, the chill of dusk nipping at her skin, urging her to either lead them into the fray or retreat into the night. Lysander scanned the crowd, faces distorted by pain and uncertainty. A boy, no older than 15, clutched a tattered piece of cloth, an old banner that once symbolized hope. His trembling fingers mirrored her own fear, and she stepped forward, her voice cracking under the weight of expectation. "We shall not allow his death to be the final note in our symphony of resistance, shall we?" The question hung in the air, fragile against the swell of grief. The crowd shifted, some nodding, others turning away, fractures in their resolve deepened with every heartbeat. A gust of wind swept through the hollow grounds, rustling the fallen leaves and carrying the acrid scent of damp earth. Lysander glanced at the empty space where their leader once stood, her heart racing. What would it mean to lead these people, to rally them when failure loomed like a dark cloud with each heartbeat? The graves whispered their stories, reminding her of the stakes. The crowd's eyes bore into her, heavy with unspoken questions and raw longing. What if she led them into a trap? What if she became just another name etched into stone? The tension thickened, a palpable force. Lysander swallowed hard, her throat tightening. She could slip away into the shadows, where the echoes of grief wouldn't claw at her. No one would follow a coward. The thought sliced through her doubt, yet could she bear the burden of their lost dreams? The crowd surged forward, their voices rising in a tumult of grief and uncertainty. "Justice for our leader," they cried, the chant swelling until it threatened to engulf her. Each shout resonated in her chest, a reminder of their leader's unwavering spirit. Yet, as their cries filled the air, a chill settled in her bones. What if she led them into danger? What if this moment became a eulogy for more than just one life? The graves murmured their warnings, as Lysander pressed her palm against her cheek, grounding herself against the tide of despair. As the last light dwindled, casting the hollow grounds into twilight, Lysander stood amid the tumult. The cries of the crowd faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind through the graves. Each gaze The judgment gorge loomed like a gaping maw beneath a blanket of night, hungry for justice or perhaps vengeance. Lysander pushed through the throngs, bodies pressing against her like an unrelenting tide, the scent of sweat and fear saturating the air. Elysia's voice rang out, a cold bell tolling the hour of reckoning, each word dripping with authority and echoing off the jagged stone walls as if the mountains themselves had turned witnesses to this grim spectacle. 1,000 desperate eyes bore down on her, urging her forward. Would she be the beacon of hope or the shadow that eclipsed it? Determination clawed at her resolve, no more hesitation. She had to reach the platform before it was too late. Lysander surged ahead, elbows jabbing, feet pounding against the uneven ground. The crowd roared, a sea of rage and anticipation. She spotted the platform, a dark silhouette against the flickering torches where the resistance leader stood, shackled, defiance etched in his features. The executioner, a figure cloaked in darkness, brandished the blade, glinting under the starlight. A shiver raced down her spine as shouts erupted, drowning her thoughts, the fervor of the mob, a chaotic symphony. Each step felt like wading through molasses, determination igniting her every move. Elysia's voice cut through the din like a knife. "Today we shall purge this realm of its treachery." Her gaze swept the crowd, a hawk poised to strike. The executioner stepped forward, the blade raised high, a glimmer of steel ready to fall. Panic tightened around her throat as the crowd chanted, a mantra of bloodlust drowning out reason. She squeezed through the throng, fingers brushing against the cool stones of the gorge, grounding herself. The moment stretched caught between action and despair, as she locked eyes with the leader, fear and hope mingling there, a silent question waiting for her answer. Just as she broke free from the crowd's grip, Elysia turned, their gazes colliding with the force of a thunderclap. The world narrowed to the space between them. Lysander's voice reached out, urgent and raw. "By the stars, I can't let this happen." But the crowd's roar engulfed her, a tidal wave of fury. Elysia smiled, a chilling curve of lips, relishing the moment. The executioner lifted the blade, poised to strike, each heartbeat echoing in her ears.
Lysander's legs felt rooted, a tree in a storm, caught between flight and the need to save. What options remained? A surge of anger ignited within her, burning away the last vestiges of fear. She lunged forward, arms outstretched, but the distance felt insurmountable. The blade glinted,
A tremor rippled through the crowd as dawn unfurled its colors across the sky, the first light slicing through the shadows of the Judgment Gorge. Lysander stepped forward, the beat of her heart echoing in her ears. The air hung thick with tension, the stones around her echoing the strength of her determination. Elysia's enforcers loomed like a dark cloud, ensuring that fear reigned over grief, but she had come too far to turn back now. Beneath the gaze of dawn, she would ignite a spark or watch it all crumble to ash. A bitter taste coated her tongue. This was not how it was supposed to end. Justice beckoned, and she would answer. "This is not the end," Lysander shouted, her voice breaking the silence. Heads turned, but only for an instant. Fear gripped the crowd as fingers twitched and bodies tensed. Elysia's enforcers shifted, muscles coiled, warning emanating from their stony expressions. The crowd shifted uneasily, casting sidelong glances, weighing their loyalty against the threat of violence. Lysander stepped closer, desperation clawing at her throat. "We must stand together," but the words felt like smoke dissipating before they could take hold. A few murmurs of agreement flickered, then dimmed, snuffed out by the oppressive air of intimidation. "Look at them," she urged, her arms wide, a gesture meant to encompass all that had been lost. "They want to keep us silent, to bury our voices beneath their tyranny." Even as her words tumbled forth, hesitation clouded their faces. A child clutched her mother's hand, the mother's grip tightening, a fragile shield against the world crumbling around them. Lysander's heart sank. They were not ready. "Not yet." A shout pierced the air, a challenge from one of Elysia's enforcers. The crowd recoiled, their faces drained of color, revealing raw fear. Anyone who speaks against Elysia will pay the price. The threat hung like a guillotine blade. A throng of terrified people rushed away, leaving Lysander alone at the edge of the gorge. A wildfire of anxiety ignited within her. A last desperate glance met the eyes of a few stragglers, but they turned away, retreating into the shadows. The dawn light crested over the gorge, illuminating the path of escape for the frightened crowd. Lysander stood alone, silhouetted against the rising sun. Fragments of their whispers echoed in her mind, a cacophony of lost hope. What could she do, standing alone with the weight of a shattered dream? Justice slipped through her fingers like sand, and the quiet ache of despair settled in her chest. A single question gnawed at her resolve. Was it too late to rally them back, or had the darkness already claimed their hearts? The Judgment Gorge loomed as dawn broke, staining the sky blood-red, a portent of the upheaval to come. Lysander Praxus stood on the makeshift platform, her heart raced, pounding against her ribs, the weight of a fractured community pressing down on her. She needed to inspire them, to ignite the flickering embers of rebellion against Elysia Zaroth's tyranny. But time was slipping away. If justice wasn't served by week's end, the political prisoner would be lost forever. The consequences would be dire, not just for their cause, but for her very soul. The crowd's anxiety rippled through the air, a suffocating presence tightening around her throat. It was now or never. Lysander's voice rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the morning fog. "We cannot let fear bind us. Together we can stand against Elysia. Justice is within our grasp." But as her words left her lips, the crowd's anxiety escalated. Whispers of Elysia's enforcers reached her ears, a dark promise that any show of support for her would be met with violence. As she scanned their faces for a spark of courage, she found only wide eyes and trembling lips. The clock was ticking, the seconds clawing at her resolve like ravenous wolves. "We have until the end of the week. We must act now." A sudden roar erupted from the edge of the crowd. Elysia's enforcers, clad in black armor, advanced like a wall of terror. Their leader, a hulking brute named Garrett, seized a bystander, a young man who dared to shout in support of Lysander. The sickening crunch of bone echoed as Garrett's fist met flesh, and the crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that felt suffocating. Panic ignited, spreading like wildfire. Feet shuffled backward, fear fracturing their unity. "Look what happens to traitors."
Garrett bellowed, his voice dripping with malice. The young man crumpled, and the crowd's resolve shattered like glass underfoot, leaving Lysander alone on the platform, her throat dry, desperation clawing at her mind. Every second slipped away, and every heartbeat echoed the truth. She was losing them. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words lodged in her throat. The crowd was breaking apart, her call to arms drowned in the rising tide of fear. "You have to choose," she urged, though her voice cracked as she spoke, betraying her uncertainty. "Will you allow Elysia to break you, or will you fight for what is right?" But the terror spread like a disease, and faces turned away, retreating into chaos. Lysander's heart sank, heavy and undeniable. She had come to lead them, yet here she stood, paralyzed, questioning whether she could ever be the change they needed. The debt of justice loomed over her, and if she failed now, it wouldn't just crush her, it would bury them all under Elysia's oppression. The last shreds of hope faded.
Dawn broke over the Judgment Gorge, a thin veil of light creeping across the rocky terrain. The dread in Lysander Praxus's chest was palpable, a physical weight that echoed Talia's fierce words in her mind, a summons to resist. The crowd stood in tense silence, reluctance hanging in the air. Elysia's enforcers prowled the outskirts like vultures, suffocating any flicker of hope. As Lysander stepped forward, the chill of the stones beneath her feet reminded her of the stakes involved. The executioner's axe loomed on the horizon, a relentless countdown to finality. Today she would either ignite the spark of resistance or watch it vanish into nothingness. Lysander scanned the faces before her, searching for signs of solidarity. They huddled together, whispers of dissent trapped in their throats. She raised her voice, steady yet urgent. "We stand united, unyielding. Fear cannot bind our spirits any longer." A few heads turned, eyes narrowing, but the majority remained fixed on their feet, silence creating an insurmountable barrier. Each heartbeat in the crowd echoed the retreat of courage, warriors dulled by despair. The enforcers closed in, their boots crunching against the gravel like thunder. Lysander's pulse quickened. She shifted her stance, a signal, a plea for unity. "Look at what Elysia has done. This isn't just about us, it's about everyone who has suffered under her rule." A ripple of movement stirred, a spark of rebellion igniting in a few eyes, but it was extinguished just as swiftly. They were paralyzed, bound by fear. Lysander clenched her fists, anger boiling just beneath her skin. How could they not see? A glance to her left revealed a pair of enforcers, their gazes slicing through the crowd, searching. No time. Her voice rose again, fierce as the wind. "Stand with me. We have nothing to lose but our chains." The words hung in the air, heavy with unfulfilled promises. A man in front of her wavered, then turned, his shoulders slumping as he retreated deeper into the crowd. One by one, they melted away, leaving Lysander isolated on the precipice of hope and despair. The enforcers were closer now, their laughter cutting through her desperation like a blade. Lysander's resolve faltered as she searched for the right words to rekindle their courage. But the crowd was a wall of silent witnesses, their eyes cast downward, unwilling to risk their safety for the spark of rebellion. The standoff stretched, taut as a bowstring. Chapter 6. Whispers of Resolve. The hollow grounds buzzed with a tense anticipation, the morning air thick with unspoken fears and hopes. Lysander Praxus stood atop a makeshift platform, a heavy thump in her chest echoing the urgency of the moment. This was the rallying cry for the oppressed to unite against the regime. They had to act before the week's end. The clock ticked down mercilessly, each second urging her to ignite the spark of rebellion. Below, the crowd gathered, their faces a mix of determination and uncertainty, ready to hear the call for action. Lysander raised her voice, cutting through the murmurs. "We have a chance, a secret alliance that can bring down the tyrants. The prisoner holds the key to our freedom." Her words lit flickers of hope among the crowd, faces brightening with belief. But just as momentum began to swell, a smooth serpentine voice slithered through the throng. Elysia Zaroth emerged, her presence like a shadow draped over the sun. "And what do we know of this so-called alliance?" she challenged, her eyes glinting like daggers. "What guarantees do we have that Lysander speaks the truth?"
The doubt she sowed sliced through the fragile hope Lysander had built. Elysia continued, her voice dripping with honeyed authority. "You're here, risking everything, yet you trust a mere rumor? What if this is a trap? What if Lysander is leading you to your doom?" The crowd stirred, whispers of uncertainty rippled amongst them. "No, we can't falter now," Lysander cried, desperation tinging her voice as she locked eyes with the wavering crowd, but their expressions were marred by doubt and fear. The crowd divided, some flowing toward Elysia's false comfort, while others hesitated, caught between hope and fear. Lysander's heart raced as she fought to maintain control. What had started as a unified front crumbled before her eyes. 3 days until the regime's judgment hung over her like an impending storm. "Stand with me," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by Elysia's cruel laughter, a stark reminder of how quickly hope could turn to despair. The air thickened with tension, uncertainty wrapping around the crowd. The weight of an uncertain future bore down on her. She wouldn't let this be the end. Yet her words barely broke through the rising chorus of dissent. As the crowd began to turn, she sensed a flicker of rebellion, still smoldering in a few eyes. One last chance to ignite a fire before the regime snuffed them out forever. Would she risk everything to reach them?
The hollow grounds buzzed with an electric tension as dusk settled, shadows stretching across the anxious faces of the gathered crowd. Lysander Praxus stood at the forefront, urgency coursing through her veins, each heartbeat a reminder of their perilous situation. If she didn't rally the oppressed before the week ended, justice for the political prisoner would slip away, leaving a burden of despair far too heavy to carry. A flicker of hope ignited within her at the sight of rebellion sparking in their eyes. This was the moment to unveil the secret alliance, to unite them against the regime's iron grip, transforming their fear into defiance. Yet, looming behind her like a spectre, Elysia lingered, ready to extinguish that flame with her poison-tipped words. Elysia stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. "What evidence do you present, Lysander? Mere whispers from nameless shadows. Do you truly believe these fanciful tales can ignite our spirits? We have endured too much to be swayed by mere illusions." The crowd wavered, doubt creeping into their minds like a chilling wind. Lysander struggled against the weight of Elysia's words, each one a dagger aimed at her credibility. 3 days left, 3 days to change everything. She inhaled deeply, focusing on the faces before her, their hopes and fears resting on her shoulders. With newfound determination, Lysander raised her voice, weaving fear with fierce resolve. "I summon the voices of the silenced, their whispers now roaring with fury. Their tales shall become the hammer that shatters the chains of our oppression." She gestured toward a group of former prisoners, their faces pale yet resolute. As they stepped forward, the air crackled with anticipation. Elysia scoffed, but Lysander pressed on, the energy shifting in the crowd, uncertainty transforming into a collective defiance. "If we wait any longer, the chance for justice will fade. We cannot allow them to manipulate our fears." But Elysia wouldn't relent. "And what of your empty promises, Lysander? You lead us into the abyss, and I shall stand by, unyielding, to witness your folly." Her voice dripped with scorn, but Lysander locked eyes with her, unwavering. The crowd was restless now, whispers rising like a swell in the ocean. Lysander's heart raced, each beat a countdown to the moment of truth. If she faltered, if she let Elysia's poison seep into their minds, it would spell disaster. "We rise together, or we fall apart," she cried, her words bursting forth like fireworks in the night sky, igniting a flicker of resolve in their eyes. The murmurs grew loud. The crowd pulsed with energy, a living entity drawn together by shared grievances and a flicker of hope. As dusk enveloped the hollow grounds, casting a warm glow over the uneven plaza, Lysander stepped forward, pulse quickening with anticipation. She scanned the sea of faces, each one a mirror reflecting her resolve and fear. This was the moment, the fragile unity threatened by the guard's presence, yet it felt like a spark igniting parched undergrowth. "Join me, my friends. Together we shall shatter the chains of this regime and rise from the ashes like a reborn flame," she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding, slicing through the tension. Cheering erupted, unified cheers rising to meet the twilight, but doubt lingered as Elysia shifted in the shadows, a storm brewing around her.
Lysander's words flowed like molten steel, piercing the gathering doubt. The political prisoner holds the key to our freedom. She locked eyes with a man in the front row, his brow furrowed, uncertainty etched into his features. He knows their secrets, the corrupt lies that bind us. A ripple of murmurs spread, igniting the crowd's imagination. Hope bloomed, tendrils of resolve intertwining their fears into something fierce and unyielding, blossoming against the encroaching darkness of the regime. Elysia's voice cut through the air, a serrated whisper that clawed at the edges of their hope. And what of the peril? Such claims lack substance. Can you truly place your trust in him? Her presence loomed, casting doubt over the gathering. The crowd shifted, uncertainty swirling around them. Lysander clenched her fists, grounding herself against the tide of doubt. Trust will come through action. We stand on the brink of change. Each word became a lifeline thrown into the churning sea of doubt, a challenge to rise above their fears and seize their destiny. As Elysia spoke, tension coiled tighter around their resolve. But the growing energy in the crowd was palpable. They leaned forward, eyes bright with defiance, ready to embrace the unknown. A woman near the front, clutching her child, whispered fervent words of support, and a surge of warmth filled Lysander when she felt the crowd's support. This was not just her fight, it was theirs. The prisoner's knowledge can dismantle the regime. We are stronger united. The cheers grew louder, reverberating through the hollow grounds, drowning out Elysia's attempts to sow doubt, transforming fear into fierce determination. The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching over the hollow grounds as the crowd erupted in unified cheers. Lysander stood at the center, pulse quickening, feeling the belief swell around her. A shared vision shimmered in the dusk, illuminating their faces with a glow.
The hollow grounds thrummed with energy as dusk draped its shadows over the uneven floor of grave markers. Lysander stood at the edge, headstones looming like silent witnesses to Elysia's chaos. A chorus of voices filled the air, the fervent cries of rebellion mingling with the ghosts of the fallen. All eyes turned towards her, questioning whether she was the leader they needed. Doubts hung in the air like heavy fog, tightening her grip around her arms. Each heartbeat thickened the atmosphere with anticipation, a stark reminder of the stakes, justice for the imprisoned and unity for the oppressed. Would she rise to the challenge? The crowd surged like a living wave of desperation and defiance. As Lysander shifted, gravel crunched beneath her boots, a stark reminder of the graves surrounding her. Each step felt heavier, burdened by the memories of those who had fought and fallen. Elysia's shadow loomed large, casting doubts that twisted in her mind. What if she failed? What if the uprising crumbled, her uncertainty crushing its spirit? She could not betray their trust. She would not let fear shatter their resolve. But how to convey her strength? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of damp earth and impending rain. A distant rumble echoed, matching the turmoil within her. The crowd surged with shared energy, their faces reflecting her determination. She raised her voice, trembling yet fierce. We gather not for one, but for many. Not for a single moment, but for a future. The words hung in the air, a thread of connection weaving through the hearts before her. Would they grasp it, or let it slip away? In that moment, clarity pierced the fog of her doubts. The uprising was not solely hers to command. It pulsed with the heartbeat of the oppressed, a force greater than any single leader. Elysia had tried to sow division, but the truth shimmered brighter. Their collective strength could not be extinguished by one voice. Lysander set her jaw firm, ready to face the challenge ahead. As the first drops of rain began to fall, she stepped forward, purpose driving her. The crowd inhaled deeply, their resolve solidifying as night fell. She declared, "We are the light in this darkness, and we will not falter." The question remained, could they unite to ignite the spark of true rebellion? The hollow grounds loomed around Lysander, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, a bittersweet contrast to the tension crackling in the atmosphere. Shadows flickered along the crumbling stone walls, their ancient carvings whispering tales of past conspiracies. The uneven ground beneath her boots felt both familiar and treacherous, a reminder of lives once lived here. Muffled voices surged like a restless tide, rising and falling in a chorus of anticipation, punctuated by the rustle of banners unfurling in the gentle breeze. At the center, the elevated platform awaited her,
a stage set for confrontation and revelation, surrounded by gravestones that bore witness to the weight of history, lending a somber gravity to her purpose. With each step toward the platform, Lysander's pulse quickened, echoing the urgency in the air. The crowd collectively gasped, a sharp intake of air as she drew closer, their faces illuminated by flickering torchlight. Bitterness of doubt mingled with the wildflower perfume wafting through the gathering. Gripping the edge of the platform, she steadied herself, palms pressed against the cool, rough stone, grounding against the tide of anxiety threatening to pull her under. The rehearsed words danced on the tip of her tongue, ready to burst forth like the lightning that had lit the sky before the storm. She hesitated, scanning the crowd for familiar faces, hoping for allies amidst the uncertainty. "Elysia, your tangled web of lies unravels in the light of truth, and I am the tempest that will expose your treachery." The words sliced through the murmur, ricocheting off ancient walls, awakening the spirits of those buried beneath the gravestones. The crowd shifted, a wave of murmurs crashing against the stone, faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. The air grew electric, charged with the weight of her accusations and the history beneath her feet. Doubt gnawed at her resolve, the weight pressing down on her chest, but she pushed it away, focusing instead on the glimmer of conviction in the eyes of those who still believed in her cause. But Elysia stepped forward, her presence swallowing the space, her voice smooth like silk yet edged with steel. "And what disorder will your so-called truth unleash, Lysander? Can we truly trust a captive whose loyalty is as flimsy as the banners you cling to?" The crowd wavered, uncertainty flickering like shadows in the torchlight, a reminder of the grave markers surrounding them. Lysander's breath hitched, the metallic taste lick 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 lick.
Chapter 7. Embers in the Gloom. As dusk settles over the Judgment Gorge, the sun sinks, bathing the jagged cliffs in a warm light that battles against encroaching shadows. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, remnants of the past injustices etched into the weathered gravestones that line the gorge. Lysander Praxus stands before the cage, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his chest. Elysia Zaroth stands nearby, her unwavering gaze anchoring him against the oppressive atmosphere. The crowd gathers, eyes brimming with apprehension and hope, waiting to see what he will choose. Taking a deep breath, Lysander steps forward, the cage looming before him, a tangible barrier separating freedom from sacrifice. With resolve, he closes the door behind him, sparking a glimmer of hope in the eyes of the oppressed. Elysia's gaze remains fixed on him, understanding that this act transcends mere defiance. It is a declaration of solidarity with those who have suffered. The crowd watches in hushed awe as Lysander locks eyes with them, his commitment resonating in the heavy air. A sense of purpose ignites within them, and as if on cue they erupt into chants of his name, their voices rising in unison. Faces that once bore the weight of despair now shine with newfound determination, echoing back the courage Lysander has shown. In that moment, the gorge itself seems to hold its breath, the whispers of the past mingling with the fervor of the present. Lysander feels the charge of their hopes, realizing that his sacrifice is not in vain. It is the spark they need to rise against oppression. The air crackles with tension, and the crowd stands united, ready to forge a path toward a brighter future. Dusk draped over Judgment Gorge like a shroud, the sun's final embers flickering out, leaving only the glow of torches illuminating the jagged rocks. Lysander stood at the precipice, her pulse quickening with urgency. "This is it," she thought, the words echoing in her mind like a battle cry. Below, a crowd of anxious faces looked up at her, their expressions a mix of hope and fear as they awaited her words. This was not just a speech, it was a rallying cry for those oppressed by Elysia's tyranny, a moment to ignite the flame of rebellion before darkness consumed them all. The air felt thick, charged with anticipation, mirroring the tension building within her as she braced to confront Elysia. Elysia stood defiantly before her, arms crossed and a mocking smirk on her face. "You think these people will follow you? They're terrified of what I'll do if they dare to rise. You're a fool, Lysander." Her voice dripped with venom, but Lysander felt a fire igniting within her, fueled by the fear Elysia wielded like a weapon. The crowd murmured, uncertainty rippling through them.
A glance at the sky confirmed it. Darkness was creeping in faster than she had anticipated. She had to act now or risk losing their chance for freedom forever. 3 days until those who defy Elysia face her wrath, she reminded herself. Urgency propelling her forward, she must make them believe, or she would fail them all. Stepping closer, Lysander's voice rose above the whispers. "You may have power, Elysia, but it's built on fear. Look around you." She gestured to the crowd, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, eyes reflecting a longing for change. "They are ready to fight, but they need a leader, and I will be that leader." Elysia's expression hardened, yet Lysander detected a flicker of doubt. The crowd's energy swelled, and she could almost taste victory. However, Elysia's followers shifted restlessly, their loyalty wavering, caught between the lure of rebellion and the grip of fear. Facing Elysia, Lysander felt the moment weighed heavily upon her. A sudden clarity washed over her. The cage, the very symbol of Elysia's control, loomed ominously behind her. If she locked herself inside, it would be a sacrifice, a statement that she believed in justice, even at the cost of her own freedom. "I will show them." Desperation ignited her resolve as she stepped toward the cage. The crowd gasped, the sound echoing ominously in the still air. "This is it," she shouted, challenging Elysia, the weight of her conviction heavy in her chest. "If I must suffer to bring you justice, then so be it."
The hollow grounds lay before Lysander, a sunken plaza steeped in shadow, as dusk draped its velvet cloak over the remnants of ancient stone. Her gaze swept across the uneven floor, where weathered gravestones jutted like forgotten memories, their inscriptions nearly erased by time. The air was thick with the mingling scents of damp earth and wildflowers, punctuated by an electric anticipation that tingled against her skin. Murmurs rose and fell around her, restless voices echoing against the crumbling walls that enclosed the gathering. She pressed her palms against the cool, rough stone, grounding herself amid the swirling unease, the texture stark against the soft grass beneath her worn boots. Hope flickered in the fading light, but beneath it lay a storm of doubt, with Elysia's looming presence hovering ominously nearby. Chants began to ripple through the crowd, a chorus of voices rising in solidarity, each word pulling at Lysander's heart. The energy crackled in the air, wrapping around her like an electric current, urging her forward onto the elevated platform. She took in her people's faces, illuminated by the waning light, their expressions a mixture of fear and fierce determination. The rough stone of the platform felt solid beneath her feet as she stepped up, a reminder of their endurance. But as she opened her mouth to speak, a sudden shout erupted from the back, slicing through the unity like a knife, and the air turned heavy with uncertainty. The crowd shifted, tension tightening around them as whispers spiraled into anxious glances. Lysander clenched her fists as murmurs morphed into a low growl of discontent. The ancient carvings on the walls, stories of betrayal and loss, seemed to come alive, their weight pressing down on her shoulders. She stilled, spotting a figure pushing forward, their face obscured by the gathering darkness. The scent of damp earth heightened, mingling with the sweat of fear as Lysander braced herself for whatever challenge loomed, the crowd's resolve flickering like the last rays of light disappearing from the sky. Just as she gathered her breath, preparing to rally the crowd once more, the figure drew closer, their voice a jagged edge that cut through the pulsating energy. "This isn't enough. We need more than words." The crowd echoed the sentiment, the whispers swelling into a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm her resolve. Lysander clenched her teeth, tension radiating through her body as the weight of their expectations bore down. Shadows closed in around her, dusk enveloping the gathering. In that moment, the stakes had never felt higher. Elysia's presence loomed large, a spectre that could either galvanize them or tear them apart. As dusk settled over the hollow grounds, the air thickened with the scent of grilled gorge fish wafting from nearby stalls. Families huddled around shared bowls of grain porridge, their laughter mingling with whispers of the departed, a constant reminder of the graves that dotted the landscape. Lysander Praxus stood at the forefront, her rough-spun tunic blending seamlessly with the crowd, yet her voice rang clear, echoing against the solemn stone memorials. It was a time for unity, a time for courage. But as she studied the faces before her, a glint of doubt flickered like the dying light, and Elysia's shadow loomed, a dark spectre against the gathering twilight.
Lysander raised her hands, palms open as she addressed the crowd, warmth radiating from their presence. Together we shall ascend, as the dawn bursts forth, a fiery promise illuminating the dark. Her breath quickened as she spoke, almost hearing the whispers of restless spirits wrapping around the crowd like a thick fog. Nearby, a child tugged at her mother's sleeve, their fingers sticky from a sweet fig pastry. Eyes wide as they listened. "If we don't act, the shadows will consume us." A murmur rippled through the crowd like the rustling of leaves in a distant storm, but Elysia stepped forward, her voice cold and precise, slicing through the air. To heed her call is to invite disorder, a reckless dalliance with the void. Elysia's words dripped with venom, igniting fear among the people. A woman in a layered cloak clutched her child closer, the coarse fabric scratching against the boy's cheek. "You speak of justice, but justice demands a price." Elysia's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for the flicker of uncertainty. "We can honor the dead by standing together," Lysander urged, invoking the Watcher of the Graves in a prayer unspoken yet palpable, her hope that the spirits would lend their strength. The crowd shifted uneasily, caught between the chaos of Elysia's manipulation and the stark reality of their shared fears. As tension mounted, a scream shattered the atmosphere, drawing all eyes toward a figure collapsing among the graves, their form crumpling like a leaf blown off its branch. Shock rippled through the assembled, the hushed murmur of disbelief overshadowing Lysander's words. The gravekeeper, a stooped figure with a shovel resting against his leg, dropped his tools and rushed towards the fallen, his face pale. The crowd's unity teetered on the brink of collapse, caught between the chaos of Elysia's manipulation and the stark reality of their shared fears. The figure lay still, a heavy silence settling over the scene. The spirits, restless as they were, now bore witness to the unfolding drama. Would they heed Elysia's warning of chaos, or would they...
Dusk descended over the Judgment Gorge, casting ominous shadows across the steep cliffs. Lysander Praxus stood at the edge of the anxious crowd, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Each second was a stark reminder of the deadline looming above her. If she didn't lock herself inside the cage tonight, the debt incurred could shatter their community forever. The murmurs of uncertainty from the gathered townsfolk twisted her stomach, their fear threatening to drown her resolve. She met Elysia's gaze, which flickered with doubt. This was her moment of accountability for the future of her people. If Lysander failed, the consequences would be permanent. There was no room for failure. With only 3 days left until the political prisoner's execution, she had to act now. "You are gambling with lives, Lysander. Do you truly believe this reckless sacrifice will yield anything but despair?" Elysia's voice sliced through the tension, sharp and desperate. Each word felt like a dagger pricking Lysander's resolve, and she hesitated, her breath growing shallow. The crowd's uncertainty swirled around her, faces contorted in confusion as they debated whether to support her or plead for her to reconsider. Time was slipping away, and each heartbeat echoed the urgency of her decision. If she faltered, if she let their doubts seep into her, it would betray everything she stood for and everything they had fought against. With a deep breath, Lysander took a step toward the cage, her heart racing with an intensity that made the ground feel unsteady beneath her. Each step felt impossibly heavy, like the very earth was resisting her. The murmurs quieted, a hush sweeping across the crowd, and she could feel their eyes boring into her, weighted with expectations. She glanced back at Elysia, whose expression was a blend of fear and fierce determination. "If you go through with this, I don't know what will happen next," Elysia said, her voice trembling. Lysander swallowed hard. Panic gripped her throat. There was no more time for second-guessing. The clock was running out, and she had to make her choice now. Lysander reached the cage, her breath hitching as she grasped the rusty lock, its cold metal biting into her palm. With one last glance at the faces of her people, each face a testament to their shared struggle, she turned the lock and pulled the heavy door shut behind her. The clang echoed through the gorge, a finality that resonated in the hearts of those who remained. Hope flickered in their eyes, but doubt still hung heavy in the air. As she secured the lock, the weight of her decision crashed down on her like a tidal wave.